Hi, I'm Donna Balzer, and I love to garden.
I'm Steve Biggs. I love to garden too.
We're both horticulturists.
And gardeners. But even though we're professionals, we're not garden snobs. That means we can take the science of gardening and make it simple for you.
Gardeners love to grow year-round. Herbs in the fall or winter, or flowers and vegetables in the spring. So I'm Donna Balzer.
I'm Steve Biggs.
And we are your no guff gardeners. And what we're trying to do with our no guff idea is say to you that all that other stuff that you might have read, use your own brain to think about it. Is it sensible stuff? Is it nonsensical? Is it something that you think is really true or not? And so first of all, we were calling it garden myths. And then we realized, everybody does myths. And so we changed it to guff, and we had our little artist draw up a guff character for us.
We'll start with the survey today. And I'd like to see a show of hands. Who composts the old-fashioned way in a pile? Hands, hands.
Wow.
A good chunk of the room. That's good.
Well,
okay.
We didn't even ask who composts.
Yeah.
Who composts? Everybody,
Wow.
almost. Okay.
Good.
And half, at least, of those people are
So
composting
half
in a pile.
What about in a bin? Who has a bin, whether a wooden one or a plastic one?
Wow.
Good, okay. How about a rotating composter?
Who has a fancy rotating composter? All the girls?
All the girls.
Is that all the girls?
Okay.
Because these are just smart gardening, aren't they?
These are for girls. And so this is what we do.
Guff is the guy that's looking over your garden fence. He's the guy that says to you, you must test your soil. Have you tested your soil yet? Or he says,
Must double dig.
must double dig. Has anyone double dug in their garden? Oh, we have one double digger in the room.
Okay.
Okay. Well, what about must lime? Every now and then in the Calgary Herald, they reprint an article from another location. And they say right away, you must lime. And I'm like, must lime? Forget about that. So you'll see guff all around. There'll be old guff, stuff from old garden books. There'll be new guff, stuff you'll see on the internet. He's everywhere.
So the reason that we pick on guff is that we think guff makes the garden less fun.
And so, of course, we like to show off our kids. And I usually just show off my grandchildren. Cohen, Molly, Kale, love gardening. But because we have Stephen here today, we have to show off his kids too.
Mm-hmm. So here's my helper, Quinn. Pulled a carrot, picked an apple. And this
Emma.
is Emma.
You might have seen her in the Calgary Herald a couple of weeks ago. Emma said to us when I was visiting last fall and we were finalizing touches on the book, she said, make sure to tell people that the pumpkins, what did you say about the pumpkins?
They get bossy.
The pumpkins
get bossy. They take over the garden. Leave a lot of space.
So we didn't have a Kid Says yet, but we might move into a Kid Says book next. We're not sure.
Okay. So understanding climate, everyone's probably thinking, what a boring thing to start a book with. But really, what do we do in Canada but talk about weather and climate?
Yeah, I was going to say we're in Canada.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? So understanding climate, we'll understand that Stephen will be planting when he gets home tomorrow. But I like to put up some numbers from Edmonton because people say to me all the time, because it's so far north. In fact, I'll just point out we made one small mistake in the book. We said Edmonton was 300 kilometers, or in brackets, 900 miles north of Edmonton. So
I was editing that part, probably.
Clearly we paid our editor way too much money. So this is frost-free dates. Maybe you already know this information. Do you already know how many frost-free dates we have in Calgary? Do you know how many? Do you know that Edmonton has 140 frost-free dates? It's shocking. And it's because they're at a lower elevation than us, of course. But I had no idea that Toronto had this many frost-free dates. Shocking. So when we get rid of the Edmonton scenario and we look at our worst case scenario in Calgary, this is according to Environment Canada. I did not make these numbers up. Our worst scenario is 42 frost-free days.
So I'm staying in Toronto.
So you say, how could two people from two different climates, how could we work together? And we're looking at how we're similar, not how we're different. We still need to wait a certain date before we plant, but it's always based on what's your last frost-free date. You always back up from there. So we just wanted to shock you with our first slide.
We have here a picture of a leaf with some frost on it. And a lot of people think about frost as an enemy. But we put this up here because we both think of frost as a beacon or as a milepost. And when we're planting our gardens, we look at frost.
And then we hose it off. But the trouble is, in our climate and our elevation, it's not all about frost. This is my zucchini last summer.
Last June, wasn't it?
Stephen just said to me when I was in Toronto, he said, remember last year when I came to Calgary, I had to wear my winter coat. What was that, March or was that into April? June 10th. Thank you very much, Stephen. And so my zucchini froze, but you'll see later in the same pot, it actually came back. This one did not die. But we have some temperatures, even at +5 sometimes, plants are not going to make it in our climate if they're the things that have to grow in a warm spell. And that's basil especially.
Basil. I call it basil in Toronto.
I don't know why he does that, but anyway, so it's not just about frost, it's about temperature. And so we know in our gardens, regardless of where you live, you have to improve that little microclimate around your plants.
So here's a great little microclimate that Donna's friend Maggie makes. And she makes her own tomato cages out of a wire mesh, and she wraps plastic around it. So her tomatoes have a mini greenhouse to protect them.
Of course, on the really bad days in June, she puts a blanket as well as a heater under that. We found in Calgary a light bulb underneath a setup like this works quite good.
This is what I use a lot of. I use a cold frame. And in late February, I actually have a pit dug out beneath this cold frame, ready to go, and I go get the fresh horse manure and I stick it in the pit, cap it with a bit of soil, and as that horse manure breaks down, as it starts to rot, then it heats the soil from underneath, so I can be eating greens in the spring when other people are just planting them. So this is a great example of manipulating your climate.
What does Shelley say about that horse manure?
Roll down the windows when you bring the car back.
Yeah. But here we are at Spruce Meadows, so make sure to take some home today. You could start your own hot frame. And you know, we're not in the worst case scenario in Calgary. I have some young friends who moved to Nordegg. They have 46 frost-free days on average. And I know I spoke in Coleman. I think they have 0 on average frost-free days. They're just too high. So we're not in the worst case scenario, but what some people do when they get very desperate is they put a greenhouse around their garden and they just give it up. So this is our little, this was actually down near High River, and I actually quite liked that idea, but I bought a greenhouse shortly after this.
Here's a tunnel. So some people put tunnels in the garden to manipulate the temperatures. And in this case, Donna's used a couple of plastic hoops and capped them with a cloth. And it's an easy way. It's a lot less expensive than putting up a greenhouse.
You can use the floating row covers, or this is a special fabric that I ordered from Australia via Italy. I know Steve doesn't want to hear that.
She likes gadgets.
I'm testing it out this year in my garden. It's a nice little poly weave. The bugs won't be able to get in, but it's like a plastic cover, so it should give some good, we don't know yet though. So we won't tell you anymore.
We'll talk next about soils.